In the bold and the beautiful, moments of ceremony are never merely ceremonial, and gestures meant to signify peace often become the spark that ignites war. The transfer of the so-called power pin from Eric Forrester to Ridge Forrester is framed publicly as an act of grace, a patriarch's emotional acknowledgement that the future must move forward even when the heart resists letting go. Eric's voice trembles not with weakness, but with memory, with the accumulated weight of decades spent building an empire from conviction and fabric, from loyalty and risk. The pin is not simply metal, it is a symbol forged from sacrifice, marriages survived and broken, children raised inside boardrooms, and ideals tested by ambition. When Eric fastens it to Ridge's lapel, he is not surrendering relevance so much as consecrating continuity. And yet, in the private language of Forrester Creations, no symbol is ever neutral. Power, once signaled, is immediately contested. The shock arrives swiftly and without mercy. Eric's sudden and severe illness interrupts the carefully curated narrative of succession and replaces it with uncertainty so profound that it fractures the family's fragile equilibrium. The patriarch, who just stood strong enough to anoint his heir, now lies vulnerable, his condition shrouded in hushed conversations and anxious glances exchanged in corridors where certainty once ruled. Illness, in this world, is not merely a medical crisis, it is a political event. The question that echoes through Forrester Creations is not only whether Eric will recover, but who stands to gain or lose, while he cannot speak for himself. The silence of a leader creates a vacuum, and vacuums in this family are never left unfilled. For Ridge, the timing is cruel and revelatory. He has just accepted the mantle of leadership with a mixture of pride and humility, acutely aware that he is stepping into a role defined by his father's shadow. The power pin feels heavier now, transformed from an emblem of trust into a test of legitimacy. Ridge's grief is complicated by responsibility. He must balance genuine fear for Eric's life with the immediate demands of an organization that cannot pause for mourning. Every decision he makes is scrutinized not only for its strategic merit, but for what it implies about his right to lead. In the eyes of some, the pin grants him authority. In the eyes of others, Eric's incapacity renders that authority provisional, open to challenge, ripe for reinterpretation. Standing beside Ridge is Steffi Forrester, whose resolve sharpens as the stakes escalate. Steffi understands the language of power instinctively, having learned from both triumphs and betrayals that hesitation is a luxury the Forresters cannot afford. Her loyalty to Eric is absolute, rooted not only in familial love, but in reverence for the values he instilled. Yet Steffi's loyalty does not blind her to reality. She recognizes that Eric's illness has awakened dormant ambitions within the family and beyond it. Board members who once deferred now whisper about governance. Relatives who accepted Ridge's leadership as inevitable begin to question the process. Outsiders circle like opportunists, sensing weakness beneath the brand's polished exterior. The struggle that unfolds is not a single confrontation but a series of subtle maneuvers, each revealing the fault lines within the Forrester dynasty. Some family members frame their objections as concern, insisting that Eric's condition demands caution, collective decision-making, or temporary oversight. Others invoke legacy, arguing that Eric's true vision has been misunderstood or prematurely set aside. Beneath these arguments lies a more uncomfortable truth. Eric's illness has made visible the fear that has always haunted Forrester Creations, the fear that the empire is only as stable as the man who built it. Without Eric's commanding presence, every unresolved rivalry resurfaces, every old wound seeks vindication. Ridge's internal conflict intensifies as he confronts resistance that feels both personal and ideological. He knows that leadership requires firmness, yet he is painfully aware that asserting control too aggressively could be interpreted as opportunism at his father's expense. His grief for Eric is genuine, but it is constantly questioned by those who conflate emotion with weakness. Ridge's challenge is not merely to lead, but to lead without appearing to exploit tragedy. Each decision becomes a moral calculation: act decisively and risk alienation, or hesitate and invite chaos. The power pin, once a comfort, now feels like a target pinned to his chest. Steffi, meanwhile, becomes the unyielding guardian of continuity. Where Ridge hesitates, she advances. Where others doubt, she asserts. Her motivation is not hunger for power, but a fierce determination to protect the company from fragmentation. Steffi understands that the family's internal battles threaten to erode external confidence, and confidence is the lifeblood of fashion. Investors, partners, and employees are watching closely, reading between the lines of every press release and board meeting. Steffi's decisiveness sends a message. Forrester Creations will not crumble because its founder is ill. Yet this very decisiveness fuels resentment among those who feel sidelined, reinforcing the perception that Ridge and Steffi are consolidating control under the guise of stewardship. As Eric's condition worsens, the emotional toll becomes impossible to ignore. Family members gather at his bedside, united briefly by fear, only to fracture again when they step back into the world of suits and strategy. The contrast is jarring. In the hospital room, Eric is vulnerable, his legacy reduced to the rhythm of machines and the whispered prayers of loved ones. Outside, his name is invoked as justification for conflicting agendas. Everyone claims to act in Eric's best interest, yet their interpretations of that interest diverge dramatically. The patriarch's silence becomes a canvas onto which others project their desires, their regrets, their unresolved need for validation. The power struggle escalates not through open warfare, but through calculated pressure. Meetings are convened without consensus. Alliances form and dissolve with alarming speed. Long-standing grievances resurface, reframed as principled objections. Some argue that Eric's illness necessitates a pause in leadership transitions, suggesting interim arrangements that conveniently redistribute influence. Others push for decisive action, insisting that uncertainty is more dangerous than controversy. The boardroom becomes a battleground where words are weapons and loyalty is currency. Ridge's resolve is tested as he confronts the possibility that his father's final gift may also be his greatest burden. He reflects on Eric's tears when handing over the pin, on the unspoken acknowledgement that no one ever truly leaves a legacy behind. It leaves you. Ridge's fear is not that he will fail, but that his success will come at the cost of being perceived as unworthy. He grapples with the realization that leadership inherited is leadership constantly questioned. Yet within this struggle, Ridge discovers a quiet strength. He begins to understand that honoring Eric's legacy does not mean preserving it unchanged, but guiding it through inevitable transformation. Steffi's perspective evolves as well. Her initial certainty gives way to a deeper awareness of the human cost of power. She witnesses how ambition corrodes empathy, how grief is weaponized, how family bonds fray under pressure. This awareness does not soften her resolve, but it refines it. Steffi becomes more strategic, choosing when to confront and when to concede, understanding that victory achieved without legitimacy is hollow. Her motivation crystallizes into a singular purpose: to ensure that when Eric opens his eyes again, if he opens them again, he will recognize the company he built, not a distorted reflection warped by infighting. The crisis reaches its most intense phase when it becomes clear that Eric may not be able to intervene anytime soon. This realization removes the final restraint on those waiting to make their move. The struggle for power becomes explicit, forcing Ridge and Steffi to defend not only their positions, but their interpretation of Eric's wishes. They invoke the power pin as evidence, yet they also recognize that symbols alone cannot sustain authority. What ultimately matters is action, decisions that stabilize the company, reassure stakeholders, and preserve a sense of continuity amid chaos. In the midst of this turmoil, Eric's presence remains paradoxically central. Even in silence, he shapes every choice. His legacy is no longer a static monument, but a living force, contested and redefined with each passing hour. The family's struggle reveals a profound truth. Legacy is not what one leaves behind, but what others fight over in one's absence. Eric's illness strips away the illusion of unity, and exposes the raw dynamics beneath the Forrester name. As the dust begins to settle, if only temporarily, Ridge and Steffi emerge changed. They are no longer simply heirs or executives. They are guardians of a fragile equilibrium forged in crisis. The power pin retains its significance, but its meaning has evolved. It is no longer just a symbol of succession, but a reminder of responsibility carried under the harshest scrutiny. The battle for Forrester Creations does not end with Eric's illness. It merely enters a new phase, one defined by the knowledge that power is never permanent and legacy is always contested. In this unfolding drama, the bold and the beautiful once again transforms personal tragedy into operatic conflict, reminding viewers that behind every empire lies a family, and behind every family lies a struggle for meaning as much as control. Eric's sudden illness does more than threaten his life. It exposes the truth that power, once passed, can never be reclaimed without consequence. And as Ridge and Steffi stand at the helm of a company forged by their father's vision, they confront the ultimate question, not whether they can lead, but whether they can do so in a way that honors the man who taught them what leadership truly costs. The latest developments from The Bold and the Beautiful, set to unfold on Monday, December 22nd, mark a decisive emotional crossroads for nearly every character involved, but most profoundly for Hope, Thomas, Deacon, and Deke. What initially appears to be a business reshuffle at Forrester Creations quickly reveals itself as a collision of unresolved history, buried resentment, fragile self-worth, and the unrelenting pressure of legacy. The episode does not simply move pieces across a corporate board. It exposes how personal wounds seep into professional decisions and how attempts at control often mask fear of emotional collapse. At the center of it all stands Hope, newly remarried, newly guarded, and increasingly aware that her greatest enemy is no longer Thomas alone but the part of herself that once believed she could manage chaos without consequence. Hope's reluctant decision to dismiss Deke from her production line is not framed as a triumphant assertion of authority, but as a compromise forced upon her by circumstances she never fully agreed to. The timing is cruel. Thomas's return to Hope for the future is abrupt, disorienting, and loaded with symbolic weight. For Hope, it feels less like a strategic reunion and more like an invasion, one that arrives with collateral damage she never intended to inflict. Deke's removal is not merely a staffing change. It is a visible reminder that power within Forrester Creations is rarely neutral and that Hope's brand, despite bearing her name, has never existed in a vacuum free from Forrester influence. Her internal conflict sharpens as she recognizes the contradiction at the heart of her position. She wants autonomy, yet her success remains tethered to the very family dynamics she distrusts. The reunion between Hope and Thomas is therefore charged with an emotional electricity that neither of them can fully control. Thomas arrives not as the contrite figure of past reconciliations, but as a man armed with confidence, conviction, and a carefully rehearsed narrative about growth and vision. He speaks of transformation not only in fashion but in himself, framing his return as an opportunity for redemption through excellence. His belief in the potential of Hope for the future is genuine, yet it is inseparable from his belief in his own indispensability. This duality, sincere admiration entangled with self-importance, defines Thomas's approach and complicates Hope's response. She cannot deny the truth in his words about their past collaborations. Together, they did create designs that resonated, collections that felt alive, purposeful, and bold. Those memories are seductive precisely because they remind Hope of a time when creativity flowed freely, unburdened by fear. Yet Hope is no longer that woman. Her remarriage to Liam has reshaped her priorities, not by erasing her ambition but by sharpening her sense of risk. She understands now that emotional boundaries are not optional safeguards but essential structures. As Thomas attempts to soothe her concerns, framing professionalism as the solution to everything that once went wrong, Hope confronts a painful realization. Professionalism alone cannot erase emotional history. She must articulate limits not because Thomas is incapable of respecting them, but because she herself once failed to enforce them. Her resolve to keep their relationship strictly professional is less a warning to Thomas than a promise to herself, a declaration that she will no longer sacrifice emotional stability for creative success. This insistence on boundaries, however, carries its own cost. Hope is acutely aware that by drawing a firm line, she risks alienating the very collaborator who could elevate her brand to unprecedented heights. The tension between ambition and self-preservation becomes the episode's emotional backbone. Hope's internal monologue oscillates between confidence and doubt, between the desire to reclaim her narrative and the fear that she is merely reacting rather than choosing. Her acknowledgement that their teamwork once produced remarkable results is not a concession but a reckoning. She must accept that excellence does not justify emotional recklessness. If this partnership is to survive, it must do so under new terms, terms that prioritize clarity over chemistry. While Hope and Thomas navigate this fragile détente, the ripple effects of their decisions spread outward, landing with devastating force on Deke. His dismissal from Forrester Creations is experienced not as a professional setback, but as an existential rupture. For Deke, fashion was more than a job. It was validation, proof that he belonged in a world that often feels closed off to him. Being cast aside reinforces a long-standing fear that his place within the industry was always conditional, always temporary. Seeking refuge in familiarity, Deke drifts to Il Giardino, the restaurant that represents both sanctuary and lineage. There, beneath warm lights and the hum of routine, he confronts the hollow ache of obsolescence. Deacon, stepping into the role of bartender, becomes the emotional anchor Deke desperately needs. Their interaction is understated, yet heavy with meaning. Deacon listens not merely as a father, but as a man who understands what it means to be dismissed, underestimated, and judged by institutions that claim fairness while practicing favoritism. When Deke admits that his time at Forrester Creations is over, the words carry the weight of finality. Deacon's reaction is immediate and visceral. Anger surges, not only on behalf of his son but against a system he has long resented. To Deacon, Deke's firing is not an isolated incident. It is evidence of the Forrester family's enduring arrogance, their willingness to discard people when it suits their narrative of control. This fury does not remain contained. Deacon's instinct is to confront, to expose what he perceives as hypocrisy and injustice. His thoughts turn toward those who wield influence within the Forrester orbit, Taylor and Ridge foremost among them. The possibility of confronting Taylor carries emotional complexity, given their shared history and tangled loyalties. Addressing Ridge, however, feels like a direct challenge to the patriarchal authority that has long dictated outcomes at Forrester Creations. Deacon's desire to teach a lesson is not born of vengeance alone but of a need to assert dignity, to remind the Forrestos that their decisions reverberate far beyond boardrooms and brand statements. As this storm brews, Remy's arrival at Il Giardino introduces a quieter, more introspective thread to the narrative. Finding Deke in a state of visible despair, Remy recognizes an opportunity not for exploitation but for connection. Their history is fraught with misunderstandings and mischances, yet the bond between them has never fully dissolved. Remy's presence offers Deke something rare in that moment, the possibility of being seen not as a failure, but as a designer whose worth transcends a single employer's verdict. Remy's words, gentle yet purposeful, challenge Deke's fatalism. He suggests that an ending can also be an opening, that being pushed out of Forrester Creations does not erase talent or ambition. Deke's response is cautious. He is not ready to fully reopen the door to collaboration or reconciliation, but he does not close it either. This hesitation speaks volumes about his internal struggle. Trust, once fractured, is slow to rebuild, especially when pride and vulnerability collide. Yet the very fact that Deke listens, that he allows Remy's optimism to register, signals the first crack in his despair. The awkwardness that accompanies their exchange is not a barrier but a testament to unresolved emotion. It suggests that whatever comes next will require honesty, patience, and a willingness to confront past disappointments without rewriting them. The episode's power lies in how these parallel narratives echo one another. Hope's effort to establish boundaries mirrors Deke's need to redefine his future. Thomas's confidence contrasts sharply with Deke's uncertainty, yet both men are grappling with identity, one seeking validation through mastery, the other through belonging. Deacon's anger reflects a broader indictment of institutional power, while Remy's quiet support underscores the importance of personal connection in moments of professional collapse. Each storyline reinforces the central theme, that growth is rarely clean, rarely linear, and almost never free of collateral damage. By the time the episode draws to a close, no conflict is fully resolved, yet every character stands altered by the choices they have made or the truths they have confronted. Hope emerges not as a woman who has solved her problems, but as one who has named them with clarity. Thomas remains confident, but subtly challenged, forced to recognize that his vision must coexist with boundaries he cannot simply charm away. Deacon's anger simmers, promising future confrontations that will test loyalties and expose fault lines within the Forrester dynasty. Deke, bruised but not broken, stands at the threshold of reinvention, his future uncertain, yet no longer devoid of possibility. And Remy, stepping cautiously back into Deke's orbit, becomes a reminder that sometimes the most significant turning points begin not with grand gestures, but with the courage to sit beside someone in their darkest hour. In this way, the bold and the beautiful continues to do what it does best: transform personal dilemmas into sweeping emotional dramas that resonate far beyond the confines of fashion houses and family feuds. The December 22nd episode does not merely advance the plot. It deepens the psychological terrain of its characters, inviting viewers to consider how boundaries are drawn, how dignity is defended, and how hope, true to its name, can survive even when everything familiar falls away.
Oh,